Hello, lovelies. Hello, family. This is Kimberly Purpoz, and welcome to my channel. Today, I want to do another continuation. I started a video series about sovereignty, and it's about how it should be taught to children, to our future generations. And I sort of want to talk about two terms this time, one on American and the other term is on nation. And then we're going to go into the article and do a continuation on what is sovereignty is all about, as it pertains to culture and our history. And if y'all haven't seen the first two videos to this particular series, I'm going to put a link to the first two videos. You may want to go back because I sort of go into details and I did the definition about what sovereignty is and what it's about and how it is taught to the so-called indigenous children of the Americans, which are the $5 Indians, how it's taught to them in schools, but it's not taught to our children in the school system. And unfortunately, our kids are taught to be workers or slaves in this particular society. And that's why it's important that we have our own curriculum for our own kids that we can teach. I'm going to put a link to the curriculum that I was using before that I think is great and that you don't often see in the classroom, but it's something that parents can teach their children. I believe it's like for middle schoolers, so they can learn more about government and policies and how the laws are made and written, and not just from a far away point of view, standoffish point of view, but actually how to create them. And I think that is really missing in the school system. And I'm going to share the rest of the curriculum with you all, parts more of the curriculum with you all. But anyway, we're going to go into the definition of American. We often hear the word American in the media. And I'm going to give you the definition and read the definition here in the etymology dictionary. It says here, American, and it's a noun. It says 1570s, originally one of the Aboriginal peoples discovered in the Western Hemisphere by Europeans from modern Latin Americas, from America. The original sense is now Native Americans, the sense of resident of North America of Europe, originally British descent, is from 1765. I don't know about you all, but it seems like this definition has been changed slightly, but I'm not sure. But it says here, though, I might need to start taking a picture, saving these definitions, because personally I feel like sometimes they change these definitions slightly, subtly, in order to fit the narrative what they want. And so that's why Dane Calloway, he mentioned in one of his videos how he take pictures of the lots, the signs that they put on different historical artifacts or locations. He take pictures of them because the Historical Society often changes the I guess the descriptions of them, and also with the etymology dictionary, it's constantly changing and redefining itself. Because if you look at the dictionary, Webster's dictionary, I think it's 1865 or 1868. I think it's 1865. It might be 68, but then you can look it up and see for yourself. But in that, it was published in the late 1800s. But in that particular dictionary, they had definitions of the original words. A lot of times we go back and look at those because it has a more accurate meaning of what happened during the time period, so you can have a better picture, because everything has been changed in modern dictionary to fit the narrative of what's what they want to keep going and want to keep the legacy going. I wouldn't say legacy, propaganda that's going here in society to keep the divide and to keep the original people down is to constantly change the story to fit that narrative. I did another video about how the one-sidedness of history, how it's constantly be rewritten, and how it's learned about the gray Caucasians, and how it's constantly being changed and evolved to fit their particular narrative and their story in order to keep themselves in top. But if you look at here, America, I'm not sure. It seems like the definition has changed slightly to me, but I don't have the original copy. But if you look at here in the etymology and you see American, it's been changed. Let's read it again. 1570s Aboriginal people discovered in the Western Hemisphere. The Aboriginal people that they speak in this particular definition are us. We are the Aboriginal. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. The Paleo Indians, the Aboriginal Indians, the Negro Indians are pretty much us. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. And it was found by, they were discovered by the Europeans. And then from modern Latin Americans from America. And they claim up this word, they say. So they say. And then it says here, the original sense is now Native Americans, the sense of residents of American, of North Americans, European, originally British. And so this original sense is now Native Americans, the sense of residents of North America, of European, originally British descent, is from the 1765. And you see, they changed this definition because originally it says once applied to the Aboriginals. I think that was in Webster's dictionary. Yeah, it's Webster's dictionary that says once applied to the American Aboriginals, the copper colored race, now applied to the Europeans. And pretty much this definition is saying the same thing. Okay, it says the same thing. So when you look at that and they write it in the media, in books, and you hear it in the news, just all over, they apply Americans to the gray Caucasians. Okay. And they do that because they want to replace themselves as being the indigenous when they're not, and try to gray wash the original people, which is us, out of existence. And that's pretty much what they're doing. They're trying to erase us out. So they have justification of being here. Okay. And it's also applied to the laws and the rules and how they create everything. All of it is all intertwined and intertwines together pretty much. So we know that this is what they're doing. It was originally applied to the indigenous people, but after a certain time period, with the wars and the putting the indigenous people as prisoners of wars, and having them outcast in their own homeland, just like Dr. Martin Luther King always says, this is what happened. You have Caucasians taking our identity away and applying it to themselves, which is not right. And I think in order for us to have a better understanding of what took place, we have to really understand history and, like I said, dissect it and analyze it and critique it closely to get a better understanding of what actually took place. And now we know what the the Caucasians should not even be called Americans. They should be called European Americans. Okay? Or Caucasian Americans, because that's what they are. Or settler Americans. Or the colonizers. But they should never be called the true Americans because they're not. And I just wanted to share this definition because it sort of ties into what we're talking about when it comes to sovereignty and laws and culture and who we really are as indigenous people. But let's go on here. And then when you look up nation, This dictionary talks about the definition of nation and how to America. And it says here, nation, and it's a noun. And it says century, 1300, nation, a race of people, a large group of people with common ancestry and language. From Old French, nation, birth, rank, descendants, relatives, country, homeland, 12th century. And directly from the Latin nation, nominative natio, birth, origin, breed, stock, kind of species, race, of people, tribe, literally that which have been born from nations, past principle, nasci, the born, old Latin, and then says from pi root gene, give birth, beget, and derivatives, referring to procreation and familial and tribal group. And see, and this is important because we got to realize that both prior to, um, um, we we need to understand the foundation and the true meaning of nation, and nation building. And so, I was looking at another video, and I look at other YouTubers, fellow YouTubers, and had some, I watched several other videos from other YouTubers and who are researching the same topic as I am. They also, some people feel like, some people believe that the United States, the government, is based on the indigenous laws that was here prior to the Caucasian coming here into the Americas. And a lot of the laws that are stem for, because think about it, the President of the United States is called the chief, and chief is oftentimes applied to the Indians. So I just want to make you realize that a lot of stuff that was already over here, the Caucasians used and applied it to themselves. Just something to think about. And this also shows right here the importance of having knowing your common ancestry, knowing your language. All of this been stripped from us, and that's why it's important for us to understand the importance of your tribal roots and who you are. Because once you have an identity and a common ground, that's why it's important to teach our children these, the culture, the language, and having an identity and understanding sovereignty. How all of this is interrelated to building the essence of who you really are as a group of people. And I think that's what's lost with us being African Americans, is that we have lost our true identity. Because when you think you're from Africa, we don't know what part of Africa. And like I said, I believe personally, yeah, we may be genetically similar, to to Africans. We are Africans, but I feel like the Africans, people of color, the melanated race, was already over here, which is also the Aboriginal people, the Negro people, all these crazy labels that they give us to avoid accepting the fact that we were already over here. A way of bringing on confusion, in other words. And we're the only group of people that have multiple labels and definitions, where everybody else has pretty much understood who they are. But when it comes to Great Caucasoid, they have one label, which is American, which is a false label. If anything, they should be having the labels of being European, Caucasian American, Gray American, or Pale American, as opposed to. That's why when I do my videos, I don't never say white or the American. I call them who they really are, the settlers. I call them the colonizers. I call them the pale Americans. I call them the gray Americans. I call them the European Americans. Give them labels too, because you're not going to sit here and bring confusion to us and try to bring false clarity, which is not a true clarity because it's based on a lie, and but give us chaos because you want to hide who we really are. That's why it's important that we know who we are and not listen to these false narratives and stories, these indoctrinations, tactics that they have passed eugenics, because everything's based on their opinion and the lies that they want us to believe, such as bringing over 18 million on slave boats, which is ludicrous to me when everybody know they didn't have engines to bring over that many people from another continent over to the Americas. It's just preposterous. It's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense. You did not bring over that many people. I always say, how did you bring over these people over in spaceships? Because back then in the 14, 15, 1600s, 1700s, they didn't have engines like that. Okay, they just didn't have the technology to do that. So we all know when you use common sense and logic that just did not happen. And I feel like I'm repeating myself, but oftentimes you have to repeat yourself and speak these things into the universe so it can be a better understanding. Our people really need to know this. That's why I do these videos. They need to know the truth. And that's why repetition is always the best policy. That's how they did it with giving us these false narratives. The repetition of these crazy medias and books, flooding it, constantly calling us African, calling us everything out of the book that they can think of in order to throw us off the truth and to cover up the truth. What better way? But let's continue. It says here the word is used in English in broad sense, a race of people, an aggregation of people of the same ethnic family speaking the same language. And also, in the narrower sense, a political society composed of government and subjects, of citizens and constituting a political unit, an organized community inhabiting a defined territory within which its sovereignty is exercised. And see, that's why I was trying to explain to you. That's exactly what you're doing. You see the white nationalists, they're being exposed. You see exactly what you're doing. The so-called gray nationalists. I'm not going to even give them white because they're not white. They're gray. So gray nationalists, they try to put these narratives up because this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to, I don't know what's going on, but I think with now having the internet and everything going on, you can actually see exactly what's going on and what's taking place. They're pretty much just trying to get rid of everybody else and place themselves. And if you read about nation, this is what nation is building is all about. That's why you see so many grays in politics. And it's based, solely on everything on them. They want to keep it that way. And that's why their race is dying out for them being born. And they're in fear mode because they know that their time is coming, their time is up. They are no longer the majority. And as each year go by and each century go by, it's going to be less and less of them. They know this. And that's why they're acting crazy and want to call out this crazy gray nationalism and gray this and gray America, make America gray again. That one doesn't exist. There was no such thing as grays. The Gray Caucasus Mountains and the Gray Europe and Caucasus Mountains, the Gray Caves, that make more sense. And I personally feel that, if you don't want peace to be around, the original people who were here first, then there's always the Caucasus Mountains and caves that they can go to, because this is not their land. Never will be, never has, and never will be. All they did was create a little corporation called the Americas and place themselves over this continent. And now they're trying to say that they were here first, which is a total big lie. And what way? And one way they do this is by, trying to erase us out through eugenics, through the brainwashing of history, through indoctrination, through killing and murdering us, through the experiments, the wars, and now through the prison industrialization system, through destroying the indigenous family, the AKA African Americans, and also through gentrification, um, another method, and also through the killings through cops, you know, cops going around killing indigenous people for no reason because they want to keep this great supremacy going on. And that's the whole point, is keeping control and stealing resources for themselves, by themselves, for themselves, and hoarding everything for themselves. And they want to not just do this here in the Americas, they want this to be global. And you can just see it in their actions. But this is pretty much telling you what nation building. Nation building was never meant as a unity, as togetherness. It's always been about themselves, putting it as for themselves. And you can see it through their actions and what they're doing. That's why they want only themselves over the government. They only want themselves and their way of thinking in schools. They only wanted themselves in the cops so they can see what we're doing when they need to see what themselves are doing, because they got mass killings going on and they're going around shooting up and killing folks. They need to be looking at themselves, because they got a lot of things going on, a lot of issues. They so busy looking and staring at us and trying to create things that are not even there. We're the ones that are more peaceful minded, and we don't stir up drama like that. They're the ones that are, and they need to look at themselves and police themselves and pull themselves over and throw themselves in prison, because they're the biggest criminals of all. And they don't see it that way, but this is what this is. And you notice that everything is based on their language. And this is how they do it. And that's why I believe there's a power in language. That's why it's important that we tap back into our indigenous roots and know who we are and understand, be even better if we can learn our language and reconnect to, the tribes and everything. And that's what I'm doing. I'm doing research myself, trying to connect. And that's why we're trying to rebuild and rebuild our tribes. And the ones that don't have a tribe, we create one and recreate it and bring it back. We need to come back to our indigenous culture and our heritage here in the Americas. And I think that this is a phenomenon that's happening globally. Just like here in the Americas and South America, throughout the Americas, and also in Africa, people in Africa is connecting, they already have a heritage. A lot of them still know their roots, but and that's why they're fighting back. And I think it's a great thing, especially in South Africa. They're getting their land back and connecting you to their roots. And that's why, that knowing who you are, having the essence of who you are as a people is very important. And when you have that, it brings power and strength. And it says here, the Middle English is not easy to distinguish them, but the political society since emerged by 16th century, perhaps late 14th century, and it has gradually predominated. The oldest sense is preserved, and the application nation to the native North American people. Nation building. And it says the oldest sense in preserving and the application of nation to the Native American people. Nation building created a new nation attest by 1907 and by the nation builder. And that's pretty much stealing of land, Indian lands, pretty much. And it's strange how all this is around the 14th. They were scheming. All this was written during the 14th century when they were coming over here scheming, when they found out about the luscious, rich lands here and how they wanted to take over and steal. And they wrote this into existence under their own indigenous European Caucasian language. and they put it over here into the North America, and they call it nation building, which is probably something that the Indian people already had. I'm pretty sure the indigenous aboriginals already had all this. There's a lot of stuff they mirror and mimic. A lot of stuff that we do today, they mirror and imitate and steal. And it says nation state sovereign, country of inhabitants in which are united by language, culture, and common descent is from 1918. And like I said, all this is when they brought over the flooding, nation state sovereign, and pretty much the flooding of Caucasians coming over here and taking lands that's not even theirs. And the government, which is the corporation, the America, allowed this to take place because this is what their whole intent was, to make this a great nation. Now, I have some theories. That's why I call them gray. Maybe one day I'll go into detail about that. But anyway, it says a nation is an organized community within a certain territory. Or in other words, there must be a place where its sole sovereignty is exercised. Theodore Woolsey, Introduction, A Study of International Law, 1864. See? All of this is all this stuff was written and put together in their language. The etymology, which is study of language and words, was put together, fairly recently. And like I said, 14th century, they were scheming. They were learning about who we are. And they brought themselves over here and attacked. Learning our ways, stealing the resources and how we do things, and applied it to themselves and act like that they were the ones that are creators when they didn't create anything but chaos. And then coming over here, and that's why I said, makes me wonder if they even from this planet. That's why I call them gray. It's like they all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere, and nobody understands this race or group of people and how they just come here and reap havoc everywhere they go. And that's why the ancient Egyptians always says to stay away from them. They call them the barbarians. They said to stay away from them. And for some reason, the Moors who who opened up these cans of worms, allowed all this to happen, and they came back. Now this is what happened. They, like viruses, taking over the world, the planet, and reaping havoc. Everything is dirty, pollution, destroying, contaminants, radiation leaks and everything. And they don't care. They're like, they're not from here. That's why I wonder, they probably have another home planet to go to. They don't care about this planet. If they did, they wouldn't destroy it, tearing down trees and wasting stuff and putting pollution all in the air and the water, and trying to kill off the original indigenous people to put themselves here, only to steal the resources. And I don't even know if the resources they're taking, are they keeping it here on this planet, or are they taking it to their home planet? That's what I ask all the time. But that's a whole nother video. I can go on and on about that. Maybe one day I'll do another video on that. But that's just one part that I want to talk about. I was just talking about the Americans and how it's tied to nations, how they are doing now, they're reaping havoc because they're upset because they're dying off, and they don't want to die off. They want to expand and continue to destroy and kill. And it's nothing but chaos since it's been here. And so, and this is what they're doing. You got to look at things from a holistic point of view as a whole. But let's go over here. And once again, I'm back on this page here about this curriculum. How it's important, how American Indian history, culture, and language, how it's important that we have a curriculum framework for our children and our future generation to understand this. These words, I'm going to jump out back over here. Understanding the true meaning of these words and how it's applied in their language. How it's important for that we go back and reconnect to our true indigenous tie, because that's very important. One way I know with Cherokee, there's a website with Cherokee is heavily brainwashed, but there's few melanated people there who not melanated, but I'll say the Mongoloids Indians are still there. You know, it's a few of them, but the true indigenous people, which is us, we were pushed away with it, away from who we were through the Jim Crow. That's why the whole point. That's a big point of how why they did Jim Crow was to keep us to tear us away from who we are, because they, you know, they had so many tactics. They were just constantly attacking us, and that's why, it's like I said, it's important that we go back to it and reconnect to exactly, who we are. The original way. Back to what our grandparents, our great grands already knew, and we were torn from it through these crazy laws and stuff. That's why it's important we understand sovereignty. And like I said, they do it through words, through language. That's why I bring up here language, the history. That's his story, which is based on Caucasian story. That's why we create our own history with our story. So our story is very important. That's why we need to recreate, and learn our own history. Not the Caucasian history, but the indigenous history. We need to go back and reconnect to our culture. That's missing. We have our culture, but by the time we create a culture, the Caucasian comes back and steals it and applies it to us, to their culture. It's like a constant stealing of who we are. It's like they never create their own. And in language, that's why we have to go back to our native indigenous tongue. There's power in language, you guys, very powerful. But I was left off on page 6. I'm going to scroll back down. If you want to learn about all these charts and more definitions about sovereignty, and read up on the history and the policies that was created and Dawes Commission, and how everything was tied together in a way, you might want to go back and look at video number 1 and video number 2 to get a better feel and more understanding. But right now we're going to go to page 6, and we're going to go over here to needs of historical accuracy. And that's what I'm saying. We got to go back to the accuracy of what we what actually took place, because what we're looking at are false narratives. And false narratives and one-sided view of history based on eugenics and on the colonizers and whatever the colonizers are saying. And a lot of these things were put in place in order to bring strength to themselves, in order to conquering this whole continent for themselves. And what better way is to erase everything that took place prior to them even stepping foot on this particular continent. They erased everything. That's why they don't go past the colonization, because they know that if you go past that, there's no existence, no records of great Caucasians. They were in the Caucasus Mountains. They were in Europe. They, were in the middle of the Dark Ages. And prior to that, they were in caves, and they don't want people to know that. And that's their origin. And that's something that our kids need to know. And we also need to understand, our children need to know that we were winning these wars. And the reason why they tried to tear our spirit down and destroy who we are is to keep us from going back to who we really are and knowing who we are and bringing that powerful essence of who we are into existence, because they know that we will win. And they know that it will empower us to take back what is ours. And that's something that they don't want to happen. That's why they going crazy, these shootings and everything. But once we were fierce warriors, and they know this. And, and they know that if we go back to that, they won't be here no more. We'll be sending them back to where they came from. And that's what they don't want. But anyway, it says here the need for historic accuracy, and that's a definite need. Is a need of historic accuracy, and that's what's missing. A lot of stuff have not been written accurately due to racism and bigotry and discrimination. That's why it hasn't been written accurately. And that's the sole reason why it hasn't been written accurately. And another, everything is based on eugenics and Caucasians. And because they've written everything, and they should not be the only ones written. It should be written. The indigenous people, the AKA African Americans, should be the ones writing their own narrative. And that's why it's important that we do write our own narratives, our own laws, and rebuilding. And it's like every time we build, they come in and take over. And part of that's because we don't have our own sovereignty, our own nation. And that's a big issue. And technically, this is our nation. And we should have, they sitting over this particular nation with a corporation that they created to protect themselves or to make it right, make a false narrative that that this is their land when it's not. And that's why they don't want to let go of it. That's why they try to ignore the fact that we need reparation. They don't want us to have that because they know that there's power in having resources. And that's why they try to strip us from it, even though it's not rightfully theirs. It says tribal sovereignty has not been understood. Therefore, a prevalent concern among American Indian scholars is to present an accurate history. The Institute of Development of Indian Laws defines sovereignty as the supreme power for which all specific political powers are derived. And this is something that we lack. And and that's why we need to be doing our own research and having our own institutes and our own colleges, and that's free from Caucasian influence, and that's based on solely our point of view, so we can get a more accurate depiction of what actually took place. Because having Caucasians be the main ones, everything slanted towards their angle, and that's beneficial for them, you're never going to get an accurate depiction of who we are. We need to have it from our point of view as well, and that's what's missing. It's not inclusive of who we are, and that's something that we're going to have to create. They're not going to allow that to happen, because they don't want the truth to be out. That's why it's important that we research and find out for ourselves and create for ourselves, and not create, but investigate. That's the best term. Investigate what happened so we can create our own history, and investigate it, and which is based more on facts and science, so you can have a better understanding. And it says here, and that's what we need is our own institute. I know, I'm pretty sure we got a few that's sprouting up here and there, and they're out there, and that's why. And it would be nice to come together in a united form in a more powerful way, so the word can come out. But it says here, all the sovereign powers were once held by tribes, not the U.S. government. Whatever power of the federal government may exercise over Indian nations received from the tribe, and not the other way around. And see, that's the big problem. We need to, even though we create our own tribes, the issue is that the United States want to plant a firm hold over everything that's decided upon. And with the United States having only Caucasians and everything based from a eugenics point of view, it's going to be very difficult. That's why it's important. It's very difficult, but that's why it's important to have our own understanding, the insides and outs of this law. And I don't think we do understand. I don't think we even scratch the surface, because it's very deep. It's very deep. More than deeper than we imagine. And that's why it's important that we go in, research and study and dig out the truth, and research and pull it out and expose it, so the truth can be heard, so we can see. And a lot of stuff is so hidden with these secret societies and organizations that's going on, and the rich elite. They want to keep stuff hidden. And that's the problem. That's the thing. It don't need to be hidden. It needs to be exposed. And once there's more exposure, there's more education among the masses in order to do something to fix this problem. But what the problem is, secrecy and being hidden. And if you don't know what you're dealing with, it's sort of hard to fight when something that is so hidden. That's why it's important to expose it so you can fight it and know what to do to fix the problem and the issues that come with it. And it says, including the inherent powers of the following. The powers is to determine to the form of government, the power to define conditions of members in the nation, the power to administer justice and enforce laws, the power to tax, the power to regulate domestic regulations of its members, the power to regulate property taxes. And see, while I'm saying they got all these powers, taxes, and I think that's a big issue. Tax, and if we're treated as second class citizens, then why are we paying taxes? Why is our money and resources going towards graves? The Queen of England and all, just all graves and the rich elite. That's the biggest problem, and all the resources going straight to them, even though we're paying for it. That's why they want us here to constantly pay for them. They want to push us down at the very bottom, but they want to use all of what we got for themselves, and that's the problem. They want to continue to mooch off of us and freeload, and they got to go. And that's the problem. And we shouldn't be paying taxes to no one. And that is like stealing our money and resources that money should be going towards ourselves and our community, towards our people, towards our tribes, to build ourselves up. And none of it should be going towards race. And that's the problem. All these taxes, billions of tons, trillions of dollars are going towards them and going towards their schools. That's why you see them in these big houses and nice, luscious communities and hoarding big banks accounts and enjoying themselves while we're struggling and they've taken all our resources and our money. And that's a big problem. And if we can't be treated fairly, then why are you having access to our resources? We need to be cutting them off. They should not have access to our resources. And I think the problem that we have is we're not sure how to cut them off. And that's something that we should be investigating and researching. How do you cut them off from our resources? They should not have access to anything. That resources that we do have, because we do have a big buying power, and we don't use it effectively. If we know how to use our and value what we have and use it for ourselves and our own benefit, that can make a huge difference. And it says the power to form government. That's something that we should learn how to do. How this government was formed. We already know that it was based on a lot of